welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. I cannot wait to get into what we're going to talk about this week because it is something I know you've experienced probably today, at least this week, I'm sure this month, which is a donor stall. We're going to talk about why donors stall and what we can do about it and what most nonprofits miss in the stall, what we're getting wrong about it. I know that you've experienced this. I experienced this as a business owner as well. Have you ever gotten a donor that seemed incredibly interested? They attend an event, they ask thoughtful questions, they tell you how much they love the mission. They may even hint at wanting to help, and then nothing. Crickets, ghost. The emails slow down, the follow-ups getting awkward, momentum disappears, and you're like, what happened? It was going so well. What happened? If you've experienced this, you are not alone. I can tell you are not alone. This is one of the most frustrating parts of relationship building because it creates uncertainty. And I'm going to talk about donors and fundraising, but this is really relationship building for anyone, volunteers, board members, community members, anyone you want to activate into a relationship. This will be addressed. I'm just using fundraising because it is our biggest pain point. And so when this happens, the frustrating part is that it creates uncertainty. And what happens when we get uncertain? Our brain fills in the stories, right? We don't know the answer, so we're going to crank up the monkey mind and try to find an answer. You start replaying conversations in your head. You wonder if you said the wrong thing. You wonder if they lost interest. You wonder if you should follow up again, or if that would feel pushy. How many times is too many times? I get that question all the time. And I want to talk about why donors stall, because in most cases, it's not random, and it's not about the money, and it's not anything you did or didn't do or said or didn't say. So let's talk about this and one of the biggest misconceptions about it. And then I'm going to teach you what to do about it. One of the biggest misconceptions in fundraising is that donor relationships either succeed or fail in like a dramatic way. But honestly, most of them don't fail dramatically. They simply fade away. They lose momentum. And when momentum disappears, things begin to slow down. Responses take longer. Meetings become harder to schedule. Enthusiasm feels vague. Everything's just feeling a little bit off. And progress starts to seem unclear. And maybe you're starting to get the gerbil on the wheel feeling, like I keep approaching them and nothing's happening. What's important to understand is that the donor stalling is often a symptom. It's usually pointing to something deeper happening inside the relationship dynamic. So what we're going to unpack today is what donor stalling actually is, why it happens, and what nonprofits can do to begin paying attention if you want the relationships to move forward more naturally. We're going to move our emphasis from action to trust. Spoiler alert, that's where this is going. Okay, so here's what stalling actually looks like. Sometimes it looks super obvious. A donor completely disappears, but more often it's subtle. And I think that's why it becomes so confusing, because the donor could seem interested. They're liking your posts, they're coming to events, they're saying positive things, they're still responding occasionally, but nothing's actually progressing. And you're thinking, I'm doing all of these things, I'm putting all of this out there, why aren't they progressing? You get stuck. This is where you get stuck emotionally because you interpret donor interest as donor readiness. So you think if they're doing all those things, they're ready. Gosh darn it, I wish they were. But those two are not the same thing. Interest and readiness are not the same thing. Remember, awareness, interest, connection, action. So you can look at that model, the donor flow framework, and say, hey, they're interested. What can I do when they're ready for a deeper connection? Remember, you don't get to say when, the universe does. So sometimes we interpret the interest as readiness. Here's what donor stalling can look like, which is repeated delays, the classic, let me think about it and get back to you, or why don't you reach back out next month, but then you can never schedule that meeting. there's lots of enthusiasm but no concrete action. Like the classic, you can't get them to respond, but they're sharing every post that you have. Donors who stay around the edges but never seem to deepen involvement. They come to the same event every year, or they give the same amount, and they just do that, and they never seem to move off the fringe, right? Here's what's important. A stalled donor is not a disinterested donor. Sometimes they're uncertain, sometimes they're overwhelmed, sometimes they lost emotional momentum. Sometimes the relationship moved faster than trust. And relationships only move at the speed of trust. And when we don't understand the difference, we respond with more pressure instead of more clarity. So instead of focusing on the relationship, letting go of the money, letting go of getting them to do anything, the ask, the follow-up, the meeting, we focus on the relationship itself and releasing the outcome. Remember, relationship first, money will follow. So a stalled donor is not a disinterested donor. It's just a donor that's not quite ready. So here's the big reframe. One of the things I've discovered, because I've been doing this for 1 billion years, is that donors move through a relationship journey. I mean, everyone moves through a relationship journey, but donors move through a specific one. And people rarely go from, I just learned about this organization, to, I am fully committed and ready to invest deeply. Many years ago, my oldest was in grade school, and they were trying to raise money for a playground. And the PTO was trying to raise money for a playground. And I'm taking this tour. And the PTO person says, well, we're trying to raise $30,000 for this playground. I said, well, that's not a lot of money. And that was, well, now you know I'm in, right? That they were sending out letters to people asking for money. And they were so despondent that no one was getting back to them. That's because they just introduced themselves and asked for a commitment. They didn't understand the relationship journey, and why would they? They weren't fundraisers. And even though they were novice fundraisers, we can often do that as well. We get in front of somebody, we get excited, and then we think something's going to happen immediately. And we're so disappointed when it doesn't, and we feel the rejection. But there's a process that's happening emotionally. Trust develops, connection develops, vision develops, confidence develops, and when something interrupts that progression, the donor momentum will slow down. Not because the donor's bad or disinterested or that you screwed up as a fundraiser, because something disrupted the natural flow of the relationship. Sometimes it's confusion, sometimes it's uncertainty, sometimes it's pressure, right? You're giving them pressure and they're going to pull back from that pressure, or it's the lack of an emotional connection. And this is such an important shift to make, because often we try to solve this idea of losing momentum or a stalled donor by increasing activity. We're emailing more, more reminders, more follow-ups, more asks. People ask me all the time, how many times should I follow up? The real issue isn't the follow-ups. It isn't the lack of activity. It's the lack of meaningful progression. Momentum in fundraising is emotional before it's financial. My only job is to increase the emotional connection. And that's a really important distinction, that momentum in fundraising is emotional before it's financial. So I want to release the money. Don't worry about the money. Let's just worry about the relationship. Okay, let's talk about what happens when the relationship moves too fast. Now, I just mentioned that, right? Like, you can get excited and, you can meet somebody and it seems like a really good fit and you get super excited. But the relationship may be moving faster than trust. And if that happens, they will stall. And the interesting thing about a donor stall is that this is all subconscious. They might not even realize that they're doing it. It's not all subconscious, but a lot of it is subconscious, where they might not even be realizing consciously what's happening. They're just less interested than they were, or they find it easier to maybe just pull back a bit. It doesn't happen because you're not rushing, because you're manipulative, because you're the car salesperson walking across the lot trying to close the deal that day. It happens because you're passionate and you're excited. and you see an opportunity and you feel urgency around your mission. You got people to feed, you got, kids to house, whatever it is that you're working on, you feel that urgency. So the moment a donor shows strong interest, you start moving quickly toward involvement or investment. But donors sometimes need more time than you expect. And I know that's a bummer. I know you're sitting here thinking, oh, but why can't they just say yes and say yes now? Here's the thing. They can love you and what you do, and they still need more trust, more clarity, more emotional connection, and more confidence in where they fit in. Remember, our three greatest needs: connection, growth, and contribution. And so they may need more of that before they feel ready to act. Donor flow framework, right? Let's pull it back. Look at this in the context of the donor flow framework: awareness, interest, connection, action. They can be an interest for a while. And I know it's a bummer because you really want to move people from connection to action. But instead of just honoring where they're at and giving them opportunities to connect deeper is usually the way forward. So let's talk a little bit more about that. When we mistake excitement for readiness, right? When we mistake that interest for action, the donor's going to push back. And so if the ask comes too early, if they receive too much information too fast, and that's only just because you're excited and you want to share all the good news, or conversations become highly transactional, and because you work with me and you listen to this podcast, I know you would never do that. And also the donor feels like they're suddenly being managed, right? They're like a commodity that has to be managed. They're saying this without saying it. They're saying this feels too fast, but they're not going to say that. They're going to demonstrate behaviors that communicate that. There's the delay, there's the pause. They stop responding consistently. They're going to say this is going too fast without saying this is going too fast. So your job is not to try to get them to respond quickly. Your job is to honor that they need to slow it up. It's not because they don't care, but because they internally haven't caught up emotionally yet. One of the healthiest things you can do as a fundraiser is learn how to recognize the difference between interest, curiosity, and engagement, and true readiness. Those are two different things. And you're thinking, Maryanne, they're interested, they're curious, they're engaged. What more could they need to act? Yeah, I know. We're going to get to it. And I know it is frustrating from your point of view because you feel like you're doing everything right, and you are. Remember, you don't get to say when somebody's ready. That's the universe's job. The universe sends you who and when. Your job is to just be available and to meet them where they're at and meet their needs. So let's talk about how a donor can lose emotional momentum. So another major reason donors stall is because the emotional momentum fades. And I think this is something you may underestimate. I see that nonprofits underestimate this a lot. We assume that if the donor felt inspired once, they'll stay inspired automatically, right? We can just flip that switch and they're there. But that's really not how people work. Life happens, attention shifts, emotions cool down. And if the relationship isn't intentionally nurtured, the sense of connection can slowly weaken. This often happens when there's too much time between touch points. Maybe communication becomes a little generic. The donor only hears from you when money's needed, too many booty calls on your side, or interactions become informational instead of relational. You're pushing too much information forward and not creating connection. Information rarely sustains momentum. And I know that's kind of tricky because we have so much information to share and we want to tell our story. And I get that, but information doesn't sustain a momentum. People give because they feel connected to meaning, purpose, impact, and relationship. And when the emotional connection weakens, movement slows down. That's why follow-ups start to feel exhausting because we're asking for a commitment. What they need is a deeper connection. So they are going to stall on that. They're not ready for that. That's why I'm saying upping the activity is not going to help. putting your needs aside and just focusing on the relationship and building that stronger connection is what is going to increase that momentum. Now you're trying to create momentum that was intentionally lost. You're unintentionally lost. And you're going to respond by increasing pressure and checking in more, sending reminders, asking for decisions. But pressure is not emotional movement. Pressure increases resistance. People don't stay emotionally engaged automatically. We have to nurture it. So let's understand that they're drifting away because of the emotional connection. And upping the activity will not increase that emotional connection. Okay, here's another reason why we can lose momentum and feel the donor drift, which is they don't know the next step. And one of the things, is my emphasis is the donor flow, having a process by which we enroll people and understanding that process and how everyone in our organization fits into it. If donors will stall if they're unclear about what happens next. And this happens a lot. Okay, so if this is you, you are not alone. I ask the question all the time, what is the process by which you enroll new donors? And most people don't have one. And if they have one, it usually isn't as comprehensive as it needs to be. Donors are entering a world that's unfamiliar to them. And when there's confusion, people will pause. When there's doubt, people will pause. Remember, relationships only move at the speed of trust. So here's what this might look like. They don't understand how to get involved. They're unsure of what level of commitment is expected. They don't know whether the organization actually wants the next conversation, or they leave in interactions inspired, but really unclear on what the next step might be. And clarity matters deeply because clarity creates confidence. One of the simplest and most powerful questions fundraisers can ask themselves is, does this donor clearly understand the next step in the relationship? Not eventually, not theoretically, clearly. Because confused donors rarely move forward. And this is part of the enrollment process that you're leading people through. Let me give you an example of what this could look like. Let's say somebody sees a post on Facebook or something, and then there's an event, and they go to the event, and there's all this excitement and interest in the event, like, wow, that was really fun, and then they leave and nothing happens. So they're like, well, I'm not really sure what the next step would be or how to move forward, so I'm just going to let it go. If you're using the donor flow framework and you have an event where people are becoming interested, what you may decide to do is after that event, host maybe some small events like a lunch and learn or a breakfast or an info session or some VIP thing or something that from people who come to this event who are interested have an opportunity to step into something. You've already thought the process out for them, so you're inviting them into deliberate next steps. People want to know what's next. They want to know that you are leading and you have a process. Even leaders, even the type A leaders, they still want to know that you have a process. They want confidence in your process. And if you don't have a process and they're not confident in it, they're gonna slow. Okay? All right, here's another reason why you might feel it. The organization started performing instead of relating. Now, this one's huge, and I know if you practice what I preach, you wouldn't do this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sometimes nonprofits become so focused on securing support that they unintentionally stop building authentic relationships. You become overly polished, overly strategic, overly presentation driven. Instead of curiosity, there's performance. Instead of connection, there's persuasion. And most donors can feel that shift. And most people don't want to feel like they're being managed through a process, even though essentially they are. But we want them to feel like we want them to feel seen, heard, and understood. We want them to feel valued and connected and trusted, and to be invited into something meaningful. I don't think we mean to become transactional. I don't think that's what's happening at all. But what I do feel like is that we can become overly polished, overly strategic. We can get pitchy. And people don't like to be pitched. right? So, and instead of curiosity or building a natural, a aligned relationship, we want to prove our worth to somebody. We want to get somebody to see the value of what we bring instead of creating curiosity, creating connection, right? And donors can feel that shift. Anytime you push, people are going to push back. I say it a million times. The harder you try to impress somebody, the harder genuine connection often becomes. And I know that you want to impress someone because you're doing really good work and you want it to be seen. I get it. But the strongest donor relationships develop through simple, authentic conversations. And this is rooted in listening, asking questions, exploring shared values, and creating space for honest dialogues. Because donors don't just give to an organization, they give through relationships. And when you become overly transactional, that momentum will slow. And I want to tap into this for just a second, because donor relationships and any relationship is rooted in listening deeply, asking thoughtful questions, exploring shared values, and creating space for honest dialogue. A lot of times we get excited and we may only be hearing what we want to hear, only be hearing what benefits, the outcome that we want, and we're not really listening to what people are saying, because we're hyper focused on a certain outcome. And when we release the outcome and we just listen with curiosity, with exploration, with no outcome, we wind up having a really meaningful conversation. And in that meaningful conversation, the answer could be, this isn't for me. One of the things I say a lot is the best way to get people to say yes is to give them permission to say no. If I'm telling you whatever you decide is totally okay, however this works out is fine. Let's just talk about it and see what happens. I have no stake in the outcome of this. I just would love to learn and see what we might create together. You're giving them permission to say no, so they won't fake a yes because they don't want to disappoint you. Remember, the biggest thing about this is that we give through relationships. Relationship first, money will follow. So important. All right, now let's talk about the hopeful reframe here. Let's talk about how we shift all of this. The good news is that stalled relationships can be restarted, but we have to stop treating stalling like random rejection. There's usually a reason underneath the surface. The presenting problem is hardly ever the actual problem, right? There's missing clarity, there's a missing connection point, there's a disruption in emotional movement. And so if we stop seeing it as our personal failing or personal rejection, we can get curious about what's going on in the relationship. Once you begin identifying where momentum is breaking down, fundraising becomes far more intentional and far less exhausting, because you're not chasing and worried and stressed. The solution isn't more pressure, it's better flow. It's not to push them harder, it's to create more flow. One of the things, in the donor flow framework is the idea that creating a flow and creating a place for people to hang in that interest category until they're ready to act, and giving them opportunities to have meaningful connection, to have that connection so you can move them to action. So you can look at your framework and say, hey, where is this flow breaking down? Where am I losing people? And for most, and I'm not saying all, but from my experience, most comes between interest and action. We're taking people who are interested and we're moving them to action, and we're missing the meaningful connection. We're pushing the trust forward before the trust is ready. Relationships move at the speed of trust. So they could be participating, engaged, enthusiastic, and still not be ready because they're looking for a deeper connection. So when you build out that framework, you can lead people down a path, but most of the time, the hesitation, the stall is in interest to act, because we're pushing the act too soon. That's from what I see in my experience. But if we stop looking at this as a personal rejection or a moral failing, or something like that, and just get curious about what's going on and where we can create a better system or process, then we're going to learn a lot, and we're going to be able to activate these relationships. And first of all, keep them from stalling in the first place and restart the ones that have stalled. So if you want, I am happy to connect with you and talk about where you're at, where your flow is, and how we can build it up, where you feel like the breakdown is happening, and how we can create a better system. Or if there's somebody specific that you're trying to connect with and it's not working, we can talk about that. Sometimes it's communication, sometimes it's sequencing, it's pacing, it's clarity. But when you can see where the breakdown is, what to do about it becomes so much clearer. So if you feel like you've got a lot of people who are interested and never move forward, or follow-ups are starting to wear you down, they feel exhausting, you feel like you're bothering people, let's uncover what's going to happen and create a system that supports people throughout their entire journey, that entire flow. You can book a donor flow call with me. The link is in the show notes. I'm happy to meet with you. And get into it a little bit. In fact, I actually love these calls so much. So I get so happy, and because I'm able to help you really quickly and get you to some clarity so you can start moving people into meaningful action in a way that feels good for everyone involved. Now, here's what I'll say in summary. Donors rarely stall for no reason, okay? There's usually something happening beneath the surface of the relationship that's slowing the movement down. And when you learn how to recognize those moments with awareness, patience, intentionality, and curiosity, then fundraising becomes more relational, more natural, and ultimately more effective, and to boot, way more fun, because you're having meaningful, honest conversations instead of trying to guess what's going on or doing endless follow-ups and wondering why they're not getting back to you. Again, it's what's beneath the surface. It's not about action. It's about building trust. It's not about doing those follow-ups. I have to follow up every week. It's about giving them opportunities to build trust, supporting that framework. Where is it breaking down? Where is the relationship breaking down for them? And what can I do to support them? So maybe that person that's on the fringe, you're giving them a reason to connect more deeply, and they just didn't have one before. And it can all work for you so much better. So donors stall not because you did the wrong thing. They stalled because there's an unmet emotional need. And if we can figure that out, which I know you can, and meet that need, they will move forward. Okay, that's it for me in this episode of The Influential Nonprofit. If you want to book a call, please do. I'm happy to help. And let's activate those donors, and I'll see you next week.